The morning air in Westfield carried the distinctive smell of Iowa in early September. Freshly cut grass mixed with distant cornfields and the faint diesel exhaust from school buses lined up like yellow dominoes in the parking lot. Tobias Merrick stood at the edge of the lot, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air as he mentally prepared himself for another day at Westfield Technical Academy. His fingers absently traced the bruise on his ribs from yesterday's accidental collision in the hallway, hidden beneath layers of clothing that seemed to swallow his thin frame whole. At 16, Tobias looked like someone had stretched a 13-year-old to 5'10" without adding any of the corresponding muscle mass. His sandy brown hair fell across his forehead in an unsuccessful attempt to hide the acne scars that dotted his temples, and his wire-rimmed glasses, held together with clear tape on the left side from last week's incident, constantly slipped down his narrow nose. The oversized black hoodie he wore had belonged to his father, one of the few things left behind after the divorce that had uprooted Tobias's entire life 4 months ago. The divorce had been nuclear. His parents, once high school sweethearts who'd built a comfortable life in Des Moines, had torn each other apart in court, with a viciousness that had left Tobias feeling like collateral damage. His mother had won primary custody, but the victory had cost them their house, most of their savings, and forced them to move in with her brother Frank in Westfield, a town of 8,000 people where everyone knew everyone and outsiders were viewed with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for door-to-door salesmen. Uncle Frank's house sat on 12 acres at the edge of town, a rambling farmhouse that had been in the family for 3 generations. Behind it stood a massive red barn that Frank had converted into something between a gym and a dojo 15 years ago, after he'd come back from his 3rd tour in Afghanistan with a Purple Heart, a medical discharge, and enough demons to fill a cemetery. The barn had become his salvation, a place where he could channel his rage and trauma into something constructive, teaching mixed martial arts to anyone willing to learn, though few in Westfield took him up on the offer. Tobias had been training in that barn since he was 8 years old, every summer when his family would visit, and now, every morning since the move. Frank had started him with basic Krav Maga, the Israeli self-defense system designed for real-world violence rather than sport. "This isn't about trophies or belts," Frank had explained during that first lesson, his scarred hands demonstrating a palm strike that could shatter a nose. "This is about getting home alive when someone wants to hurt you." Over the years, the training had evolved. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for ground fighting, where technique could overcome size and strength. Muay Thai for striking, using elbows and knees as weapons. Wrestling for takedowns and control. Frank was a demanding teacher, pushing Tobias past exhaustion, past comfort, past the point where most people would quit. "Your enemies won't care if you're tired," he'd say, making Tobias drill the same armbar escape for the 100th time. "They won't care if you're hurt, they won't care if it's fair, so neither can you." But Frank had also drilled something else into Tobias, something that seemed contradictory to all the violence they practiced in the barn. "Real warriors choose their battles," he'd say, after particularly intense sessions, when Tobias's knuckles were raw from the heavy bag and his muscles screamed with lactic acid. "Any fool can throw a punch. It takes wisdom to know when not to. Violence should be your last resort, not your first. The moment you use these skills in anger, you become the very thing we're training to defend against." This philosophy had been tested every single day since Tobias had started at Westfield Technical Academy in May. Being the new kid in a small-town high school was bad enough. Being a skinny, awkward new kid who'd rather read about Arduino microcontrollers than watch football was essentially painting a target on his back, and Brady Hutchinson had been more than happy to take aim. Tobias forced himself to walk toward the main entrance, each step feeling like wading through quicksand. The school building was a sprawling brick structure that had been added to haphazardly over the decades, creating a maze of corridors that seemed designed to create blind spots where teachers couldn't see what was happening. The main hallway stretched before him like a gauntlet, lined with lockers that had been painted and repainted so many times that closing them required a specific technique known only to their assigned students. He made it exactly 43 steps before he smelled it, that distinctive cloud of Axe body spray mixed with expensive cologne that preceded Brady Hutchinson like a toxic warning. Tobias's shoulders tensed involuntarily, his body preparing for what was coming, even as his mind told him to stay calm, to not react, to be the grey man who didn't draw attention. Brady Hutchinson was everything Tobias wasn't and everything Westfield valued. 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that made college football scouts drive 3 hours from Iowa City to watch him play. His father owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties. His mother was the mayor's sister, and his future seemed predetermined. Full scholarship to Iowa State, probably marry Chelsea Morrison, head cheerleader and daughter of the police chief, take over the family business and spend the rest of his life as Westfield royalty. But there was something rotten at Brady's core, something that enjoyed causing pain the way other people enjoyed chocolate. Tobias had seen it the first day they'd met, when Brady had accidentally knocked Tobias's lunch tray, sending spaghetti cascading down his shirt, while the entire cafeteria erupted in laughter. There had been a light in Brady's eyes at that moment, a genuine joy that went beyond typical teenage cruelty. Well, Brady's voice boomed down the hallway, causing conversations to stop and heads to turn. Look who decided to grace us with his presence. How's it going, skeleton boy? The nickname had stuck after Tyler Nolan, Brady's chief lieutenant, and a weasel of a human being who compensated for his 5'6" stature with pure viciousness, had seen Tobias changing for PE. Dude looks like a medical skeleton, Tyler had announced to the locker room. I can literally count his ribs. It's like someone forgot to put meat on him. Derek Vaughn, the third member of Brady's crew, lumbered into view. Derek was the opposite of Tyler, 6'4" and built like a refrigerator, with arms so thick he had to special order his Letterman jacket. He wasn't particularly creative with his cruelty, preferring simple, direct violence to psychological torture. Where Brady was the strategist and Tyler the instigator, Derek was the enforcer, the one who made sure nobody fought back. I asked you a question, skeleton, Brady said, stepping directly into Tobias's path. It's rude not to answer when someone's talking to you. Tobias kept his eyes down, focusing on Brady's Nike Air Force Ones, pristine white, probably cost more than Tobias's entire wardrobe. Just trying to get to class, he mumbled. What was that? Tyler chimed in, circling around to Tobias's left side. Speak up, skeleton. Use your big boy voice. A crowd was forming now, that peculiar high school phenomenon where drama drew students like moths to a flame. Some held up phones, ready to capture whatever humiliation was about to unfold. Others simply watched, with the guilty relief of those who were glad it wasn't them in the crosshairs. Leave him alone, Brady. The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Zara Washington emerged from the crowd, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was one of those rare high school students who seemed to have already figured out who she was, confident without being arrogant, intelligent without being condescending, kind without being weak. Her dark skin seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her natural hair formed a halo around her face that framed eyes that could be warm as summer or cold as winter depending on her mood. Right now, they were definitely winter. This doesn't concern you, Zara, Brady said, though his tone had shifted slightly. Even he knew there were lines you didn't cross, and Zara's father was the only black city councilman in Westfield's history. A lawyer who'd graduated from Harvard and chose to come back to his hometown to make a difference. Messing with Zara meant potentially messing with someone who actually knew how to fight back in ways that mattered. Bullying concerns everyone, Zara replied, stepping between Brady and Tobias. Or did you skip the assembly about that last week? Oh wait, that's right. You were too busy getting suspended for putting Josh Mueller's head in a toilet. The crowd made a collective ooh sound that reminded Tobias of a sitcom laugh track. Brady's face flushed red, the veins in his neck standing out like rope. You better watch yourself, Tyler hissed at Zara. Just because your daddy's a big shot doesn't mean... Doesn't mean what, Tyler? Zara turned on him with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Please, finish that sentence. I'm sure everyone here would love to hear what you think it doesn't mean. I'm sure Principal Martinez would be fascinated. I'm sure my father would find it absolutely riveting when I tell him at dinner tonight. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Derek, never one for verbal sparring, simply cracked his knuckles in what he probably thought was an intimidating gesture, but really just made him look like he was warming up for a piano recital. The bell rang, its harsh electronic buzz breaking the tension. Teachers began emerging from classrooms, their presence like water on a grease fire. It didn't put it out, just moved it somewhere else. This isn't over, Brady muttered to Tobias, his shoulder checking him hard enough to send him stumbling into the lockers. The metallic clang echoed down the hallway as Brady and his crew stalked off, their departure followed by the gradual resumption of normal hallway chaos. You okay? Zara asked, her hand touching Tobias's shoulder gently. I'm fine, Tobias replied automatically, though his shoulder throbbed where it had connected with the locker. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Zara said firmly. Someone has to stand up to those assholes. Why don't you ever fight back? I've seen you in PE. You're not as weak as you look. If only she knew, Tobias thought. If only she knew about the hours in Uncle Frank's barn, about the heavy bag that had his blood on it from split knuckles, about the submission holds he could apply in his sleep. If only she knew that he could have ended this on day one, that Brady's arrogant stance left him open for a dozen different takedowns, that Derek's size made him vulnerable to anyone who actually understood leverage, that Tyler's aggression would be his downfall against someone with real training. Violence doesn't solve anything, Tobias said instead, adjusting his backpack. Zara studied him for a moment, her brown eyes searching his face like she was trying to read something written in a foreign language. Sometimes I wonder if that's true, she said finally. Sometimes I think violence is the only language people like Brady understand. She walked away before Tobias could respond, leaving him standing in the now empty hallway with the echo of her words bouncing around his skull. He made his way to AP Physics, sliding into his seat in the back corner where he could minimize his profile, make himself as small and unnoticeable as possible. Mr. Peterson, a tall scarecrow of a man whose passion for physics was matched only by his complete obliviousness to the social dynamics of his classroom, launched into a lecture about momentum and force. Force equals mass times acceleration, he wrote on the board, his handwriting barely legible. The greater the mass, the greater the force required to change its direction. Tobias found himself thinking about the principle in terms of combat. Derek had mass on his side, but that also meant he required more energy to change direction, making him vulnerable to someone who could use his momentum against him. It was basic judo, the gentle way, using an opponent's force to defeat them rather than meeting strength with strength. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from an unknown number, but he recognized the writing style immediately. Tyler had gotten his number somehow. Better watch your back, skeleton. Your girlfriend won't always be there to protect you. Tobias deleted the message without responding. This was part of their game, part of the systematic destruction of his peace of mind. The physical bullying was almost easier to handle than the psychological warfare, the never knowing when it would come. The constant state of hypervigilance that left him exhausted before noon. Lunch was its own special form of torture. The cafeteria at Westfield Technical Academy was a social battlefield divided into clear territories. The football players and cheerleaders held court at the tables near the windows, the best real estate in the room. The band kids clustered near the exit, instruments cases forming a barrier around their tables. The AP students occupied the middle ground, neither popular nor unpopular, just smart enough to be left alone. And then there were the outcasts, the misfits, the ones who didn't fit into any clear category, relegated to the tables near the garbage cans, where the smell of discarded food mixed with industrial disinfectant. Tobias usually ate alone when he ate at all. Most days, he spent lunch in the library, helping Mrs. Chen reshelve books or reading in the corner where the security camera had been broken for 3 years and never fixed. But today, Zara appeared at his table before he could escape, setting her tray down with a determination that suggested this wasn't a casual decision. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" Tobias asked, though he knew exactly what. "About Brady. About what's been happening. About why you just take it." "It's complicated," Tobias said, pushing his turkey sandwich around his plate. The bread was soggy, the turkey was questionable, and the whole thing looked about as appetizing as cardboard. "Then uncomplicate it for me," Zara said, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just letting them torture you. And I don't understand why. You're smart. You're not as weak as you pretend to be, and I know you have more fight in you than you show." "How do you know that?" Tobias asked, genuinely curious. "Because I see you in the morning," Zara said. "I run past your uncle's place sometimes early, like 6 a.m. early. I've seen you in that barn, hitting that bag like it owes you money. I've seen you doing things that look like something out of a UFC fight. So I know you can fight. What I don't know is why you won't." Tobias felt his stomach drop. He'd always been careful, always made sure the barn doors were closed, but apparently not careful enough. "You can't tell anyone," he said quickly. "I won't," Zara assured him. "But you need to tell me why. Why train like that if you're never going to use it?" Tobias was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words for something he'd never really articulated before. "My uncle says real strength is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to," he finally said. "He says violence should be the last resort, not the first. That the moment you use your skills in anger, you become the thing you're training to defend against." "That's very zen," Zara said, "but Brady's not going to achieve enlightenment. He's just going to keep hurting you until something breaks." "Maybe," Tobias admitted, "but if I fight back now on school grounds with everyone filming, I'm the one who gets in trouble. I'm the one who gets suspended or expelled. My mum's already dealing with enough from the divorce. I can't add to that." Zara leaned back, studying him. "You know what I think? I think you're afraid. Not of Brady, but of yourself. Of what you might do if you really let go." She wasn't wrong. Late at night, when his ribs ached from Derek's shoulder checks and his pride stung from Tyler's constant verbal abuse, Tobias would lie in bed and imagine what he could do. He could see it perfectly, Brady's overconfident approach leaving him open for a tie clinch, driving knees into his ribs until he couldn't breathe. Derek charging forward into a perfect hip throw that would leave him gasping on the ground. Tyler's wild swings, leaving him vulnerable to a rear naked choke that would have him unconscious in seconds. The fantasies were so vivid, so detailed, that they scared him. Uncle Frank had warned him about this, about the dark side of combat training. "You're learning to hurt people," he'd said during one particularly intense session. "That knowledge changes you. You have to be very careful not to let it corrupt you, not to start seeing violence as the solution to every problem." "Maybe I am afraid," Tobias admitted to Zara. "Maybe I'm afraid that if I start, I won't be able to stop." The afternoon brought new torments. In PE, they were playing dodgeball, that sadistic game that seemed designed specifically to give bullies a legitimate excuse to hurt their targets. Coach Anderson, a former Marine who believed that physical education should be barely distinguishable from boot camp, divided the class with the casual cruelty of someone who either didn't notice or didn't care about the social dynamics at play. Brady, Derek, and Tyler ended up on the same team, of course. They always did, through some combination of intimidation and social engineering that ensured the games were never fair. Tobias found himself on the opposite side with the theater kids, the computer science club, and a handful of others who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The rules were simple. Throw balls at the other team, hit them, and they're out. Catch a ball, and the thrower is out. What the rules didn't account for was the difference between a normal throw and Tyler's fastball pitcher arm launching red rubber balls like missiles, or Derek's ability to throw hard enough to leave welts that lasted for days. The first ball caught Tobias in the stomach, thrown by Brady with enough force to double him over. The second, courtesy of Tyler, struck him in the face, snapping his glasses in half and sending them skittering across the gym floor. The third would have hit him in the head if he hadn't managed to dodge at the last second, his training taking over for just a moment before he remembered where he was. "Nice moves, skeleton," Tyler jeered. "Too bad you can't dodge them all." Coach Anderson watched with the disinterest of someone who'd seen it all before and decided it wasn't worth the paperwork to intervene. This was part of the problem at Westfield. The adults who should have been protecting students like Tobias were either oblivious, indifferent, or actively complicit in the culture of might makes right. After PE, Tobias sat in the nurse's office holding his broken glasses, now held together with medical tape. The nurse, Mrs. Garrett, a kind woman who'd been at Westfield for 30 years, cleaned the cut on his cheek where the ball had split the skin. "You should report this," she said gently, dabbing antiseptic on the wound. "Report what?" Tobias asked. "That I got hit during dodgeball? That's kind of the point of the game." Mrs. Garrett's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd seen enough over the years to know the difference between normal gameplay and targeted abuse, but she also knew the reality of small-town politics. Brady's family contributed to the school sports programs. Derek's father was on the school board, and Tyler's mother was the district superintendent's secretary. Fighting that kind of entrenched power was like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. The walk home was usually Tobias's reprieve, 45 minutes of solitude where he could decompress, let the mask drop, and just exist without constantly watching for threats. The route took him through downtown Westfield, past the old courthouse with its Vietnam War memorial, past Morrison's Hardware, where old men sat on benches discussing corn prices and weather patterns, past the library, where he sometimes hid until closing time, just to avoid going home and facing his mother's worried looks. His mother had aged 10 years in the past 6 months. The divorce had stripped away her confidence, leaving her fragile and anxious. She worked 2 jobs now, morning shift at the dental office and evening shift at the Walmart 2 towns over, trying to save enough money to get them their own place. Every time Tobias came home with a new bruise or torn clothing, he could see the guilt in her eyes, the knowledge that she'd brought him to this place where he was suffering. "How was school?" she'd ask every evening, and he'd lie. "Fine," he'd say, hiding his split lip or bruised ribs. "Just fine." Uncle Frank knew better. He'd seen the signs, recognized the way Tobias moved like someone protecting injuries, noticed the broken glasses and torn backpack. But he also respected Tobias's choice to handle it his way, at least for now. "You know I'm here if you need me," Frank would say during their morning training sessions, his scarred hands wrapping Tobias's knuckles with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back." The training had intensified since the bullying started, as if Frank was preparing Tobias for a war they both knew was coming. Ground fighting drills that left Tobias's ears cauliflowered and his neck sore from practicing chokes. Standing sparring that taught him to read body language, to see the telegraph in someone's shoulders before they threw a punch. Conditioning that pushed his thin frame to its limits, building lean muscle and cardiovascular endurance that would serve him when the time came. "You're getting good," Frank said one morning after Tobias had successfully defended against a series of takedown attempts. "Really good. Your technique is clean, your timing is improving, you could compete if you wanted to." "I don't want to compete," Tobias said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I just want to be left alone." "Sometimes," Frank said carefully, "the only way to be left alone is to make it clear that bothering you comes with a cost." October brought homecoming, that peculiar American ritual where the entire town seemed to revolve around a high school football game. Westfield was playing their rivals from Riverside, and Brady was expected to be the star of the show. College scouts would be in attendance, and the pressure was obvious in the way Brady's bullying intensified, as if tormenting Tobias was his way of releasing the stress. The week before homecoming was the worst yet. Monday, they cornered him in the bathroom and gave him a swirly, though they stopped just short of actually submerging his head in the toilet water. Plausible deniability, Brady called it with a laugh. Tuesday, Derek accidentally knocked him down the stairs, only Tobias's training allowing him to roll with the fall and avoid serious injury. Wednesday, Tyler spread rumors that Tobias was gay, that he'd been caught staring at guys in the locker room, turning him into a pariah even among the other outcasts. Thursday, they destroyed his science project. Months of work on an autonomous robot scattered across the parking lot like electronic confetti. Each incident was carefully calculated to avoid leaving evidence, to maintain plausible deniability, to push Tobias to his breaking point without quite crossing the line into something that would force adults to intervene. It was psychological warfare executed with the precision of someone who'd been perfecting the art of cruelty since elementary school. Zara tried to help, gathering evidence, talking to other students who'd been Brady's victims, building a case to take to the administration. But fear ran deep in Westfield. Nobody wanted to be the one who stood up to Brady Hutchinson and his crew. The few who'd tried in the past had found their lives made so miserable they'd either transferred schools or retreated into complete social isolation. "This is insane," Zara said, reviewing her notes in the library. "I have 17 different incidents documented, multiple witnesses, and nobody will come forward. They're all terrified." "Can you blame them?" Tobias asked, adjusting his glasses, now permanently held together with tape and superglue. "Look what happens to people who stand up to Brady." "Look what happens to people who don't," Zara countered. "You can't keep taking this. Something's going to give." She was right, of course. Tobias could feel it building inside him, a pressure that grew with each humiliation, each assault, each day of pretending that everything was fine. His training had taught him control, discipline, the ability to channel violence into something purposeful rather than chaotic. But everyone had limits, and Tobias was rapidly approaching his. The Thursday afternoon that changed everything started like any other. Tobias stayed late to rebuild his destroyed robot, working alone in the engineering lab, with only the hum of 3D printers and the smell of solder for company. Mr. Liu, the robotics teacher, had given him access to extra materials, understanding without words what had happened to the original project. The robot was Tobias's pride and joy, a six-legged walking machine that used machine learning to navigate obstacles. He'd been working on it for months, writing thousands of lines of code, designing custom-printed parts, debugging servo controllers until his eyes burned. It was his ticket to MIT, to a future beyond Westfield, beyond Iowa, beyond the reach of people like Brady Hutchinson. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. The door to the engineering lab burst open, and Brady stood there with Derek and Tyler, their faces flushed with excitement from football practice. "Working late, skeleton?" Brady asked. his voice carrying that false friendliness that preceded violence. "What a coincidence. We were just talking about you." Tobias's hands stilled on the circuit board he'd been soldering. The lab was isolated, in the vocational wing of the school where teachers rarely ventured after hours. No cameras, no witnesses, no help coming. "I'm busy," Tobias said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Liu will be back any minute." "No, he won't," Tyler said with a grin. "He left 20 minutes ago. We watched him drive away. You're all alone, Skeleton." They spread out, surrounding him with the practiced ease of predators who'd done this before. Derek blocked the door, his bulk making escape impossible. Tyler moved to the left, cutting off access to the windows. Brady approached directly, his fingers trailing along the workbench, deliberately knocking tools to the floor. "You know what your problem is?" Brady asked conversationally. "You think you're better than us. You think because you're smart, because you build your little robots, that makes you special. But you're not special. You're just a pathetic loser who doesn't know his place." "My place?" Tobias asked, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "And what exactly is my place?" "Under my boot," Brady said, and suddenly his hand was around Tobias's throat, slamming him back against the workbench. Tools scattered, the carefully organized components of his robot sent flying. "You exist because I allow it. You breathe because I let you. And right now I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't let you anymore." The pressure on his throat increased, and Tobias felt his training trying to take over. His hands wanted to come up, to break the grip with a technique he'd practiced thousands of times. His knee wanted to drive into Brady's groin, followed by an elbow to the temple that would drop him instantly. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to fight back, to end this here and now. But they were still on school property, still technically under the school's jurisdiction. If he fought back now, he'd be the aggressor in the eyes of the administration. The bullied kid who snapped and attacked the star quarterback. His future, his mother's sacrifices, everything would be ruined. So he endured, even as his vision started to tunnel, even as Brady's grip tightened and Derek laughed and Tyler filmed with his phone. He endured until the darkness crept in from the edges and his legs gave out. And the last thing he heard was Brady's voice saying, "Sweet dreams, Skeleton." He woke up on the floor of the lab, his throat raw and bruised, his robot destroyed beyond repair. They hadn't just broken it, they'd systematically demolished it, crushing circuit boards, snapping printed parts, even pouring soda into the laptop he'd been using to program it. Months of work, thousands of dollars in materials, his future, all destroyed in minutes. But worse than the destruction was the video Tyler had sent to seemingly everyone in school. Tobias passed out, limp as a rag doll, with Brady standing over him victorious. The caption read, "Skeleton Boy couldn't even last 30 seconds. Pathetic." Tobias sat among the wreckage of his work, something fundamental shifting inside him. Uncle Frank had always said, violence should be the last resort, that you should exhaust every other option before resorting to force. Well, he'd tried ignoring them. They'd escalated. He'd tried avoiding them. They'd hunted him down. He'd tried enduring their abuse. They'd nearly killed him. Every other option had been exhausted. He stood slowly, his movements different now. The scared, hunched posture was gone, replaced by something his uncle would have recognized, the bearing of someone who'd made a decision, who'd crossed a line in their mind and found peace on the other side. Tomorrow, Tobias thought, gathering the destroyed remains of his robot. Tomorrow, things change. The next morning came grey and cold, November asserting itself with a wind that cut through clothing like a blade. Tobias stood in Uncle Frank's barn at 5 a.m., his hands wrapped, facing the heavy bag that had absorbed so much of his frustration over the months. "You're different today," Frank observed, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Yeah," Tobias said simply. "They pushed you too far. They destroyed my robot. They choked me unconscious. They filmed it and shared it with the whole school. Tobias threw a combination jab, cross, hook that made the heavy bag swing violently. I'm done being their victim. Frank was quiet for a moment, watching his nephew work the bag with a focused intensity he'd never seen before. You know what this means. Once you cross this line, you can't uncross it. Once people know what you're capable of, that knowledge changes everything. Everything needs to change, Tobias said, switching to elbows and knees, each strike delivered with technical precision. I tried it your way. I tried peace. I tried endurance. They took it as weakness. They took it as permission to escalate. Well, now they're going to learn different. Just remember, Frank said carefully, the goal isn't to destroy them. It's to stop them. There's a difference between justice and revenge. I know, Tobias said, though part of him wasn't sure he cared about the distinction anymore. School that day had a different energy. The video of Tobias passing out had gone viral within Westfield's social media ecosystem. Everyone had seen it, everyone was talking about it, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Some expected Tobias to not show up at all, to transfer schools or hide at home. Others expected him to finally break down, to cry or beg, or do something equally entertaining for their social media feeds. Nobody expected him to walk through the front doors with his head high and his eyes clear, moving with a confidence that made people do double takes. This wasn't the same scared kid who'd been their punching bag for months. This was someone else, someone who walked like they knew secrets, like they were counting down to something only they could see. Brady noticed the change immediately when they crossed paths in the hallway. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, though there was something uncertain in his voice. "How's your throat, skeleton?" "Still sore from yesterday? We need to talk," Tobias said, his voice calm despite the bruises on his neck that looked like purple-black fingers. "We are talking," Brady replied, but his usual swagger seemed forced. "No," Tobias said. "After school, the parking lot, just you and me." The hallway went silent. Someone actually gasped. Tyler laughed nervously. "Is Skeleton trying to call you out? Is he actually trying to fight you?" "I'm trying to end this," Tobias said, never breaking eye contact with Brady. "One way or another, this ends today. Either you leave me alone permanently, or we settle this in the parking lot. Your choice." Brady's face flushed red. In front of the entire hallway, in front of his friends and followers, the skeleton was challenging him. His reputation, his entire social structure, depended on his response. "You want to fight me?" Brady asked, stepping closer, using his height advantage to loom over Tobias. "You actually want to fight me?" "I want you to leave me alone," Tobias replied. "But since you won't do that willingly, yes, after school, parking lot, unless you're afraid of the skeleton." The crowd made that collective ooh sound again. The challenge had been issued publicly, witnessed by dozens. Brady couldn't back down without losing face, without admitting fear of someone he'd been tormenting for months. "You're dead," Brady said quietly. "After school, you're dead." "We'll see," Tobias replied, then walked away, leaving Brady standing in the hallway with everyone watching, wondering what had just happened. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word spread through the school like wildfire. Tobias had challenged Brady to a fight. The skeleton versus the quarterback. David versus Goliath, if David was 60 pounds lighter and had been choked unconscious just yesterday. Teachers noticed the energy, but seemed oblivious to its source, or perhaps they were just choosing to ignore it. Principal Martinez gave morning announcements about the homecoming game tomorrow night, about school spirit and coming together as a community, seemingly unaware that her school was buzzing with anticipation of violence. Zara found Tobias at lunch, her face a mixture of concern and something else, respect, maybe, or fear. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Brady will destroy you." Maybe, Tobias said, calmly eating his sandwich. His appetite had returned for the first time in months. Maybe. Tobias, he outweighs you by 60 pounds. He's been in dozens of fights. He's going to hurt you. He's been hurting me for months, Tobias pointed out. At least this way it ends. Or you end up in the hospital. I've been training for this moment since I was 8 years old, Tobias said quietly. Trust me, Zara. I know what I'm doing. She studied his face, seeing something there that made her pause. You're different today. You're not scared. No, Tobias agreed. I'm not scared. I'm done being scared. Fear is what they feed on, what gives them power. Take away the fear, and they're just bullies throwing tantrums. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every class felt like an eternity, every tick of the clock like torture. But finally, mercifully, the final bell rang, and the entire school seemed to move as one organism toward the parking lot. By the time Tobias arrived, a circle had already formed. It seemed like the entire student body was there, phones out, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Brady stood in the center, flanked by Derek and Tyler, his Letterman jacket off, his muscles visible through his tight t-shirt. I didn't think you'd show, Brady called out as Tobias approached. Thought you'd run home to Mommy. Tobias didn't respond. He simply removed his hoodie, revealing the lean muscle underneath that months of training had built. He wasn't big, would never be big, but there was a wiry strength there that made some of the crowd reassess their predictions. Here's how this is going to work, Brady announced to the crowd as much as to Tobias. I'm going to beat you until you beg me to stop, and then I'm going to beat you some more just to make sure you remember your place. No, Tobias said, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. Here's how this is going to work. We fight. When you lose, and you will lose, you leave me alone. You leave everyone alone. Your days of bullying are over. Brady laughed, but it sounded forced. When I lose, you actually think... He never finished the sentence. Brady had made the classic mistake of the overconfident, talking when he should have been watching. Tobias moved like water, closing the distance in an instant, his foot sweeping Brady's legs while his hand guided the quarterback's momentum. Brady hit the asphalt hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The crowd went absolutely silent. Brady scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. You little... he charged, throwing a wild haymaker that would have knocked out most high school students. But Tobias wasn't most students. He slipped inside Brady's guard, his elbow driving into the quarterback's solar plexus with surgical precision. As Brady doubled over, gasping, Tobias grabbed his wrist and shoulder, using a perfect judo throw to send him crashing to the ground again. Stay down, Tobias said quietly. It's over. But Brady's pride wouldn't let him. He got up again, this time more cautiously, his hands up in something approximating a fighting stance. He threw a jab, which Tobias parried, followed by a cross that Tobias ducked under. Every attack was met with a counter, every aggressive move turned against him. It was like watching a masterclass in combat sports if one of the participants didn't know he was in a class. Derek, seeing his friend losing, decided to intervene. He charged from the side, all 240 pounds of him moving like a freight train. The crowd shouted warnings, but Tobias had already seen him coming. At the last second, he pivoted, using Derek's own momentum to send him crashing into Brady. Both bullies went down in a tangle of limbs. Tyler, not to be left out, came from the other direction with something in his hand, a rock he'd picked up from the parking lot. But Tobias had trained for multiple attackers, had drilled scenarios where the odds were against him. He caught Tyler's wrist, applying a joint lock that made him drop the rock with a scream. A quick sweep put Tyler on the ground where he stayed, clutching his wrist. Brady was getting up again, but slowly his confidence shattered. His nose was bleeding, his shirt was torn, and his eyes held something they'd never held before. Fear. How? He gasped. How are you doing this? 4 hours a day, Tobias replied. Every day, for 8 years. While you were sleeping in, I was training. While you were partying, I was getting stronger. While you were bullying kids who couldn't fight back, I was learning from someone who actually knows how to fight. Brady rushed him one more time, desperation replacing strategy. Tobias caught him in a tie clinch, controlling his head. And for a moment, everyone could see what could happen. The knees that could shatter ribs, the elbows that could break faces. But instead, Tobias simply controlled him, holding him in place. I could hurt you, Tobias said, his voice only for Brady. I could hurt you badly. I could do to you what you've done to others, but I won't, because I'm not you. This ends now. You're done bullying people. If I hear about you targeting anyone, we'll do this again, and next time I won't hold back. He released Brady with a shove, sending him stumbling backward. The quarterback stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his nose, his entire worldview shattered. The skeleton he'd tormented for months had just dismantled him and his 2 best fighters in less than 3 minutes. It's over, Tobias said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bullying stops now, not just of me, but of everyone. Brady, Derek, Tyler, your reign of terror is done. Principal Martinez finally arrived, pushing through the crowd with several teachers. What is going on here? She demanded. Nothing, Tobias said calmly. Just settling a disagreement. We're done now. Right, Brady? Brady looked at the principal, then at the crowd all filming with their phones, then at Tobias standing there calm and unruffled. He could claim assault, could try to get Tobias in trouble, but everyone had seen him throw the first punch, had seen Derek and Tyler jump in, had seen Tobias defend himself with minimal force. Yeah, Brady said finally, his voice hollow. We're done. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy was different now. People looked at Tobias with a mixture of awe and respect, but also with a new understanding. The social hierarchy that had seemed so solid, so permanent, had just been shattered in a parking lot. As Tobias walked away, Zara fell into step beside him. That was... I don't even have words for what that was. It was necessary, Tobias said. I didn't want it to come to this, but they didn't leave me any choice. You could have fought back months ago. Why wait until now? Because Uncle Frank was right. Violence should be the last resort. I needed to know I'd tried everything else first. I needed to exhaust every peaceful option. Otherwise, I'd just be another bully with better training. They walked in silence for a moment before Zara spoke again. What happens now? Now? Tobias considered the question. Now things change. Brady can't maintain his position through fear anymore. Everyone saw him lose. Derek and Tyler won't act without Brady's leadership. The whole power structure that allowed them to terrorize people is broken. And you? What about you? I go back to being invisible, Tobias said. I don't want to be feared or popular or anything else. I just want to build my robots and get through high school without being tortured. But of course, it wasn't that simple. The video of the fight went viral, not just within Westfield, but beyond. Someone with the username Justice Served posted it on Reddit with the title Bullied Kid, reveals he's been training martial arts for years, destroys 3 bullies at once. And within hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments ranged from supportive to skeptical to analytical, with people breaking down Tobias's technique, identifying the different martial arts he'd used, praising his restraint in not seriously injuring his attackers. The fact that he'd defended himself against 3 larger opponents while barely throwing a punch made it even more impressive. At school, the change was immediate and dramatic. Brady walked the halls like a ghost, his usual swagger completely gone. The football team, which had once treated him like royalty, now kept their distance, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd been so thoroughly humiliated. Derek and Tyler were even worse off, having been defeated by someone they'd dismissed as weak. But the biggest change was in the students who'd been victims. They walked taller, spoke louder, took up space in ways they never had before. If Tobias could stand up to Brady, if the social hierarchy could be challenged, then maybe they weren't as powerless as they'd thought. Marcus Holloway, the freshman Brady had been starting to target, approached Tobias a week after the fight. "I wanted to thank you," he said nervously. "Brady had been making my life hell, and now he won't even look at me." "You don't need to thank me," Tobias replied. "Just promise me that if you ever get power over someone else, you won't use it the way Brady did." "Could you teach me?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Not to hurt people, but just to defend myself. To have the confidence you have." Tobias thought about it, then nodded. "Talk to my Uncle Frank. He owns a gym outside town. Tell him I sent you." Word spread, and soon Frank's gym had a dozen new students, all kids who'd been bullied, all wanting to learn not how to fight but how to not be afraid. Frank, who'd been isolated since returning from Afghanistan, found purpose in teaching these kids, in giving them the tools to protect themselves. Brady, meanwhile, was struggling with his new reality. His father, who'd always preached that strength and dominance were everything, was disgusted by his son's defeat. "You let some skinny nobody beat you," he'd raged. "You've embarrassed this entire family." The college scouts who'd been interested in Brady started looking elsewhere. His grades, which had been propped up by teachers afraid to fail the star quarterback, began to reflect his actual understanding of the material. The future that had seemed so certain, so golden, was crumbling. 3 weeks after the fight, Brady approached Tobias in the library. Tobias tensed, ready for another confrontation, but Brady held up his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to fight," Brady said quietly. "I'm here to, I don't know, apologize, I guess." Tobias waited, saying nothing. "My dad," Brady continued, "he's always told me that the world is divided into winners and losers, predators and prey. That if you're not on top, you're nothing." I believed him. I thought making other people feel small would make me feel big. "And now?" Tobias asked. "Now I realize I was just as scared as everyone else. Scared of being seen as weak, scared of disappointing my father, scared of not living up to expectations. I turned that fear into cruelty, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did to you and to everyone else." Tobias studied Brady's face, looking for deception, for some trick. But all he saw was a 17-year-old kid who'd had his worldview shattered and was trying to piece together something new from the fragments. "Apologizing to me is a start," Tobias said finally. "But I'm not the only one you hurt. You've got a lot of apologies to make." "I know," Brady said. "I'm trying. Most people won't even listen, and I don't blame them. I was a monster." "You were a bully," Tobias corrected. "Monsters can't change. People can. The question is whether you actually want to change or you're just sorry you got caught." Brady was quiet for a moment. "I got accepted to my dad's alma mater," he said finally. "Full scholarship for football. It's everything I'm supposed to want. But I don't think I'm going to take it." This surprised Tobias. "Why not?" "Because I'd just become him," Brady said. "My dad, I mean. I'd go to college, play football, come back here, take over his business, marry who I'm supposed to marry, and raise my kids the same way he raised me, and the cycle would continue. So what are you going to do instead?" "I don't know," Brady admitted. "For the first time in my life, I have no idea what I'm going to do. It's terrifying and kind of liberating at the same time." They sat in silence for a moment before Brady spoke again. "Can I ask you something? When you were fighting us, you could have really hurt us. I could see it in your eyes. You knew exactly how to destroy us. Why didn't you?" Because my uncle taught me that real strength isn't about how much damage you can do, Tobias replied. It's about knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to. It's about using exactly as much force as necessary and not one bit more. I didn't want to hurt you, Brady. I just wanted you to stop hurting others. Brady nodded slowly. Your uncle sounds like a wise man. He is, Tobias agreed. He's also accepting new students at his gym if you're interested in learning a different kind of strength. Brady looked surprised. You'd be okay with that, after everything? Everyone deserves a chance to change, Tobias said. But if you show up at that gym, you start at the bottom. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You learn humility before you learn technique. I think I've already learned humility, Brady said with a rueful smile. The whole school watching you get demolished by someone you called Skeleton Boy will do that. The transformation of Westfield Technical Academy continued over the following months. The rigid social hierarchy that had allowed bullying to flourish began to dissolve. Without Brady's crew enforcing the pecking order, students started forming friendships across previously impermeable social boundaries. The robotics team, which Tobias had rejoined after rebuilding his project, suddenly found itself with new members. Some were genuinely interested in engineering, others just wanted to be around Tobias, to understand the quiet kid who'd stood up to the untouchable. Zara, who had always been confident, found her voice amplified. She started a column in the school newspaper about social justice and standing up for others, using the parking lot incident as a launching point for discussions about power, privilege, and the responsibility we have to protect those who can't protect themselves. You started something, she told Tobias one afternoon as they worked on calculus homework together. It's bigger than just standing up to Brady. You showed everyone that the social structures we accept as permanent can be challenged. I just wanted to be left alone, Tobias reminded her. No, Zara disagreed. If that's all you wanted, you would have fought back on day one. You wanted to do the right thing, even when the right thing meant enduring months of abuse. That's what makes you different from them. And the spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. Tobias's robot, rebuilt and improved, won the state competition and earned him a spot at the national championships. MIT's admissions office, having seen both his technical skills and the viral video of him standing up to bullies, offered him early admission with a full scholarship. Brady, true to his word, had been working to make amends. He joined Frank's gym, starting at the bottom as promised, learning that real strength came from discipline and self-control rather than dominance. He publicly apologized at a school assembly, taking responsibility for his actions without excuses or justifications. Some forgave him, others didn't, but he continued trying to be better than he'd been. Derek, surprisingly, followed Brady's lead. The big enforcer had realized that without Brady's direction, he didn't actually enjoy hurting people. He'd been playing a role, living up to expectations of what someone his size should be. He found peace in Frank's gym, where his size was just another attribute to be trained, not a weapon to be feared. Tyler took a different path. Unable to accept the new reality, he transferred to a school 2 towns over, trying to escape the humiliation. Last anyone heard, he was trying to rebuild his reputation, though without Brady's charisma or Derek's physical presence, he was just another angry kid with a mean streak. As graduation approached, Tobias found himself reflecting on the journey. The parking lot fight that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, the start of a transformation that went far beyond just him and Brady. The night before graduation, there was a party at Marcus Holloway's house. His parents, grateful for how Tobias had inspired their son to stand up for himself, had insisted on hosting. It wasn't the typical Westfield party. No alcohol, no drugs, just kids who'd found each other through shared experiences of being different, being targeted, being underestimated. Tobias stood on the back deck, looking out over the Iowa cornfields that stretched to the horizon. The landscape that had once felt like a prison now felt like possibility, like a launching pad for whatever came next. "Penny for your thoughts?" Zara asked, joining him on the deck. "Just thinking about how different everything is from when I arrived," Tobias said. "I came here angry at my parents for divorcing, angry at the world for being unfair, angry at myself for being weak. I thought I'd just endure until I could escape. But endurance without purpose is just suffering," Tobias said. "Uncle Frank taught me to fight, but more importantly, he taught me when not to fight. He taught me that real strength comes from restraint, from choosing your battles carefully." "You chose well," Zara said. "You waited until you had no other choice, and then you acted decisively. You didn't become them, didn't let the violence corrupt you." "It was close," Tobias admitted. "There were moments when I wanted to hurt them the way they'd hurt me. When Brady was in that clinch, I could have destroyed him. Part of me wanted to. But you didn't." "No, I didn't. Because that would have made me no better than him. It would have validated his worldview that might makes right, that power should be used to dominate rather than protect." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Zara spoke again. "So what's next for you? MIT, obviously, but beyond that." "I want to build things that help people," Tobias said. "Robots that can assist the elderly, AI that can detect bullying in schools before it escalates, technology that empowers rather than oppresses. I want to use my skills to make the world a little less cruel." "That's ambitious." "Maybe. But I've learned that one person standing up can change everything. Imagine what would happen if everyone who'd been bullied, everyone who'd been made to feel powerless, suddenly realized they had the ability to change things." "You're talking about a revolution," Zara said with a smile. "Maybe I am," Tobias agreed. "A quiet revolution, fought not with fists but with courage, compassion, and the radical idea that strength should be used to lift others up rather than tear them down." The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect May morning, the kind that made Iowa seem like paradise. The entire town turned out, filling the football stadium where Brady had once been king. Now he sat with his fellow graduates, no longer special, no longer feared, just another kid trying to figure out his future. Principal Martinez gave a speech about resilience and growth, never directly mentioning the parking lot incident, but clearly influenced by it. She talked about how true education went beyond textbooks, how the most important lessons often came from facing adversity and choosing how to respond. When Tobias walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the applause was thunderous. Not because he was popular or athletic or traditionally successful, but because he'd shown them all something important, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. That strength wasn't about domination, but about protection, that sometimes the quietest person in the room had the loudest impact. Brady also received applause, though more subdued. His transformation hadn't been complete, might never be complete, but he was trying. He'd given up his football scholarship, choosing instead to attend community college while he figured out who he wanted to be when he wasn't trying to live up to his father's expectations. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and congratulations, Brady approached Tobias one last time. "I wanted to thank you," Brady said, surprising Tobias. "For beating you up in a parking lot?" Tobias asked with a slight smile. "For stopping me," Brady clarified. "I was on a path that would have destroyed me, maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. I would have become my father, would have raised my kids the same way, would have perpetuated a cycle of cruelty that goes back generations. You broke that cycle." "You broke it," Tobias corrected. "I just showed you it could be broken. The choice to change, to be better. That was all you." Brady nodded, then extended his hand. Tobias shook it, feeling the weight of everything that gesture represented. Forgiveness, growth, the possibility of redemption. As Brady walked away to join his family, Uncle Frank appeared at Tobias's side. The former Marine looked older than his years, worn down by war and loss, but there was pride in his eyes as he looked at his nephew. "You did good, kid," Frank said simply. "I had a good teacher," Tobias replied. "I taught you how to fight," Frank said, "but you taught yourself something more important, when not to fight, and when fighting becomes necessary, how to do it with honor rather than hatred." "It wasn't easy," Tobias admitted. "There were times I wanted to give in to the anger, to really hurt them. But you didn't," Frank pointed out. "That's what separates warriors from thugs. Anyone can learn to throw a punch. It takes wisdom to know when not to throw it, and courage to accept the consequences of that restraint." That evening, as the sun set over Westfield for what might be Tobias's last time as a resident, he stood in Uncle Frank's barn one final time. The heavy bag hung there, worn from years of use, stained with sweat and occasionally blood from split knuckles. The mats where he'd learned to grapple, to control opponents without destroying them, were faded but still functional. This place had been his sanctuary, his training ground, his therapy. Here he'd learned not just how to fight, but why fighting should always be the last resort. Here he'd built the physical and mental strength to endure months of bullying without breaking, until breaking became the only option left. "The barn's going to be busy," Frank said, joining him. 23 new students signed up after word got around about what you did. Kids who want to learn to defend themselves. Parents who want their children to have confidence without aggression." "That's good," Tobias said. "That's really good. Maybe some of them won't have to go through what I did." "Maybe," Frank agreed. "Or maybe they'll go through it but handle it better because they know they have options. Either way, you've created something positive from something negative. That's all anyone can really hope to do." As they locked up the barn and walked back to the house, Tobias thought about the journey that had brought him here. A bitter divorce had torn him from his comfortable life in Des Moines. Months of bullying had tested him beyond what most people could endure. A moment of violence in a parking lot had changed everything. But it wasn't really about the violence, he realized. It was about the choice to endure until endurance became complicity, the choice to act when action became necessary, the choice to show mercy when revenge would have been justified. Every choice had led to this moment, standing on the edge of a future that looked nothing like what he'd imagined a year ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "MIT is lucky to have you. Don't forget us small-town kids when you're changing the world." He smiled, typing back, "The world changes one person at a time, one choice at a time." Westfield taught me that, and it had. A small town in Iowa, a high school full of hierarchies and cruelties, had been the crucible that forged him into someone who understood that real strength wasn't about physical power, but about moral courage, that real victory wasn't about defeating enemies, but about transforming them into something better. The story of the quiet kid who'd stood up to his bullies would become part of Westfield's folklore, told and retold with various embellishments over the years. But for Tobias, it was simpler than legend. He'd been pushed until pushing back became the only option that didn't involve surrendering his dignity. He'd fought when fighting became necessary, and most importantly, he'd stopped fighting when the battle was won, refusing to become the monster he'd defeated. As he packed his things for MIT, carefully wrapping the components of his rebuilt robot, Tobias found a note in his backpack. It was from Marcus, the freshman who'd found courage in Tobias's example. "Thank you for showing me that being strong doesn't mean being cruel, that defending yourself doesn't mean becoming a bully, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a fight you know you could win. You've changed more lives than you know." Tobias folded the note carefully and placed it in his wallet. It would serve as a reminder of why he'd endured what he'd endured, why he'd fought when he'd fought, and why the choice to show mercy was sometimes the strongest choice of all. The summer passed quickly, filled with preparation for MIT and final training sessions in Uncle Frank's barn. The gym had evolved into something more than just a place to learn martial arts. It had become a community center for kids who didn't fit in, who needed to build confidence, who wanted to be strong without being aggressive. Brady showed up 3 times a week, working with a humility that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He sparred with younger kids, teaching them with patience rather than dominance, learning that true leadership came from lifting others up rather than holding them down. "You know," Brady said one evening after a particularly intense session, "I used to think respect came from fear, that people followed me because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't." "And now?" Tobias asked, unwrapping his hands. "Now I realize that wasn't respect at all. It was just fear dressed up as respect. Real respect, the kind you earned in that parking lot, comes from standing up for something beyond yourself, from showing strength without cruelty." "You're learning," Tobias observed. "Slowly," Brady admitted. "It's hard to unlearn 18 years of wrong thinking, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying to be better than I was yesterday." "That's all any of us can do," Tobias said. As August arrived and departure for MIT loomed, Tobias found himself oddly reluctant to leave. Westfield, which had once felt like a prison, had become something else, a place of transformation, of growth, of unexpected connections. The night before he left, the town threw him a going-away party at the community center. It wasn't officially for him. It was framed as a celebration of academic achievement for all graduating seniors heading to college. But everyone knew the real reason for the gathering. Principal Martinez gave a speech about how one person's courage could inspire change in an entire community. Parents thanked him for giving their children the confidence to stand up for themselves. Kids who'd been victims of bullying looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. But the most surprising moment came when Brady's father, the man who'd taught his son that might makes right, approached Tobias. "I owe you an apology," Mr. Hutchinson said, his voice gruff with discomfort. "I raised my boy wrong, taught him the wrong values. What you did in that parking lot, it opened my eyes to what I'd created." "Brady's choices were his own," Tobias replied diplomatically. "Maybe," Mr. Hutchinson said, "but I gave him the framework for those choices. I taught him that domination was strength, that kindness was weakness. You proved me wrong, and more importantly, you gave my son a chance to be better than I raised him to be." It was an awkward conversation, but an important one. Change didn't happen in isolation. It rippled outward, affecting families, communities, entire social structures. As the party wound down, Tobias found himself on the same hill overlooking the town where he'd stood a year ago, feeling trapped and alone. Now he stood there with friends, Zara, Marcus, even Brady, looking at the same view but seeing something completely different. "It's weird," Marcus said. "A year ago this place felt like hell. Now it feels like, I don't know, home?" "Home is complicated," Tobias replied. "It's not always comfortable or safe. Sometimes it's the place that challenges you, that forces you to become who you're meant to be." "Very philosophical," Zara teased. "MIT's going to turn you into a complete nerd." "I'm already a complete nerd," Tobias countered. "MIT's just going to give me better tools." They laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet Iowa night. In a few hours, Tobias would be on a plane to Boston, beginning a new chapter in a place where nobody knew his story, where he could be anonymous again if he chose. But he would carry Westfield with him, not the pain of the bullying, but the lessons learned from enduring it, confronting it, and ultimately transcending it. He would carry Uncle Frank's wisdom about the responsible use of force. He would carry the knowledge that one person standing up could inspire others to do the same. Most importantly, he would carry the understanding that real strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about how you chose to get back up and what you did with the power once you had it. The morning of departure came crisp and clear. Uncle Frank drove him to the airport in Des Moines, the 2-hour drive passing mostly in comfortable silence. As they pulled up to departures, Frank turned to his nephew. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, "not for fighting, but for knowing when to fight and when not to, for showing mercy when you had every right to seek revenge, for turning a negative experience into positive change for others." "I couldn't have done it without you," Tobias said. "Without the training, without the philosophy, without knowing you had my back." "The training just gave you tools," Frank said. "What you did with those tools, that was all you." They embraced, a rare display of affection from the taciturn Marine, and then Tobias was walking through security toward a future that seemed bright with possibility. On the plane, he pulled out his laptop and began working on a proposal for his first project at MIT. An AI system designed to detect patterns of bullying in schools, to identify victims and aggressors before situations escalated to violence. It would use social media analysis, behavioral patterns, and environmental factors to flag potential problems for intervention. It was ambitious, maybe impossibly so, but Tobias had learned that impossible was just another word for untested. A skinny kid standing up to 3 bullies had seemed impossible too, until it wasn't. As the plane lifted off, carrying him away from Iowa and toward Massachusetts, Tobias thought about the cycles of violence and how they could be broken. Brady's father had passed cruelty to his son, who had passed it to others, creating ripples of pain that spread through the entire school. But Tobias had created different ripples, ripples of courage, of standing up, of choosing mercy over revenge. Maybe that was how the world changed, not through grand gestures or revolutionary moments, but through individual choices to be better, to do better, to expect better from ourselves and others. Maybe every time someone stood up to a bully, every time someone chose mercy over revenge, every time someone used their strength to protect rather than dominate, the world became a little less cruel. His phone buzzed with a message from Brady. "Good luck at MIT. Thanks for giving me a second chance. I won't waste it." Tobias smiled and typed back, "We all deserve second chances. Make yours count." As Iowa disappeared beneath the clouds, Tobias closed his eyes and thought about the future. There would be new challenges at MIT, new obstacles to overcome, new tests of character and resolve. But he was ready for them now in a way he hadn't been a year ago. The bullying had nearly broken him, had pushed him to the very edge of what he could endure. But in surviving it, in confronting it, in ultimately transcending it, he had discovered something important about himself. He was stronger than he'd ever imagined, not because of his martial arts training, but because he'd chosen to use that training responsibly, with restraint and wisdom beyond his years. The story that had begun with a bitter divorce and a forced move to a small town in Iowa had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for yourself and others, and the transformative potential of choosing mercy when revenge would be justified. As the plane carried him toward his new life, Tobias carried with him the lessons of the old one. Every scar, visible and invisible, was a reminder of what he'd endured. Every friendship forged in the aftermath of conflict was proof that people could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves. The quiet kid, who'd been called Skeleton Boy, had become something more. Not a fighter, though he could fight. Not a hero, though some saw him that way. But simply someone who'd learned that true strength came from knowing when to act and when to show restraint, when to fight and when to forgive. And in learning that lesson, he'd taught it to others, creating a ripple effect that would extend far beyond Westfield, far beyond Iowa, touching lives in ways he'd never fully know. The plane flew on through the morning sky, carrying a young man who'd been forged in the crucible of adolescent cruelty and emerged not bitter or broken, but wise beyond his years and committed to using his strength, physical, mental, and moral, to make the world a little less cruel, one choice at a time. Behind him, in Westfield, the changes he'd catalyzed continued. Frank's gym grew, becoming a safe space for kids who needed to build confidence. Brady continued his journey of redemption, slowly earning back the trust he'd destroyed. The social hierarchies that had enabled bullying continued to crumble, replaced by something more egalitarian, more kind. And in a converted barn on the edge of town, new students learned not just how to throw punches and apply chokes, but more importantly, when not to use those skills. They learned that real warriors chose their battles carefully, that true strength came from restraint, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was show mercy to someone who didn't deserve it. The legacy of Tobias Merrick in Westfield would endure long after the details of the parking lot fight faded from memory. It would live on in every kid who found the courage to stand up for themselves, in every bully who chose to change rather than continue their cruelty, in every bystander who decided to intervene rather than just watch and record. It was a legacy built not on violence, but on the careful, considered use of force when all other options had been exhausted. It was a legacy of transformation, of redemption, of the radical idea that people could change if given the opportunity and inspiration to do so. As Tobias began his new chapter at MIT, developing technologies that would help identify and prevent bullying before it escalated, he carried with him the knowledge that real change happened one person at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. The bullies had thought they were teaching him his place in the social hierarchy. Instead, they had taught him that hierarchies built on cruelty were as fragile as glass, waiting for someone with the courage to show everyone just how easily they could shatter. And in shattering that hierarchy, in standing up when standing up seemed impossible, Tobias had discovered something fundamental about human nature, that most people wanted to be good, wanted to be brave, wanted to stand up for what was right. They just needed someone to show them it was possible. He had been that someone for Westfield. Now, as his plane descended toward Boston and his new life began, he wondered who he might inspire next, what changes he might catalyze, what cycles of cruelty he might help break. The future stretched before him, full of possibility and purpose. And Tobias Merrick, once called Skeleton Boy, once tormented and humiliated, now flew toward it with confidence born not from his ability to fight, but from his wisdom to know when fighting was necessary and his courage to show mercy when it was not. The story that had begun in pain was ending in purpose. But really, it wasn't ending at all. It was transforming, evolving, spreading outward in ripples that would touch lives in ways both seen and unseen, creating a legacy of courage, compassion, and the radical belief that strength should be used to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. And somewhere in Iowa, in a small town that most people had never heard of, that legacy was already taking root, growing, spreading, proof that one person standing up at the right moment could change everything. That true strength came not from domination, but from the courage to do what was right, even when what was right was also what was hardest. The plane touched down in Boston, and Tobias Merrick stepped into his future, carrying with him the lessons of his past and the determination to use those lessons to make the world a little less cruel. One innovation, one intervention, one act of courage at a time.